Hey boys and girls, we are going to add something new to our writing notebook. So if you would turn to the grammar cup section, we are going to add quotation marks down here, and this is going to end up being on page 148. So we're going to add that in to the table of contents. All right, if you need a minute to write that, you can pause the video and then flip to page 148 when you get done. All right, on page 148, now you're going to get the foldable that you were given. You're going to cut out around the jar, and then you're going to cut the little fireflies out and pay attention. Like I did not spend all this time cutting these out fancy. Just cut around them and glue them on there. These are tips for using quotation marks. So after you get this cut out, you're going to glue this on page 148. And of course you're going to use the glue sponges, and then so you can pause the video and do that and get that glued down here, and then you're going to start the video again and we'll go through and do some highlighting with our colored pencils. Okay, so pause now and then start when you're ready. All right, so we are going to look at some tips for using quotation marks. Now we put quotation marks around words that people say out loud. So we are going to highlight say out loud. The quotation marks go around things people say, and I'm going to draw the little quotation marks with my color down here underneath where it says the word quotation marks. It kind of looks like two apostrophes. Now we could say it looks kind of like commas, but commas go down at the bottom where the letters are sitting, and these go up in the air up above them. We capitalize the first word of a direct quotation. So when we are writing and we put things that people say out loud, we have to capitalize the first word. Even if it's not the first word of the sentence, we capitalize the first word of the quote. So we're going to highlight this. You can do it in different colors if you want. Capitalize the first word of a quotation. So we're going to highlight that. And then down here it says, if the quote comes before the person who spoke, place a comma after the quote before the closing quotation mark. Well, that sounds really confusing. We're going to look at some examples on the next page. Basically, what it's saying is if your sentence starts with a quotation, you put a comma at the end of the thing the person said out loud, and then you put who said it. And we'll look at some examples of that. And then this next one says, if the quote comes after the person who spoke, so if it said, Mom said, and then the quote comes, you're going to place the comma after the person who spoke before the opening quotation mark. It sounds really confusing, but it's really not that hard. Put end punctuation inside the quotation marks. So we'll highlight this. End punctuation goes inside the quotation marks. So we're going to highlight that. Okay, so just one more time, your end punctuation, like your period or your question mark, is going to go inside the quotation mark. So we'll look at some examples of that on the next page. So if you need to pause and make those highlights, you can. Okay, we're going to go ahead and look at page 149. So on this first one, you're going to write quotation marks and then put your little quotation marks there to remember what they look like and where they go. Are punctuation marks used to show someone's exact words? Okay, so when you're writing a story, or you're telling exactly what someone said to you, you're using the quotation marks to show that that's what they said. Okay, you can pause the video and write this part now. Okay, the next thing that we're going to write is that you place end punctuation and commas inside the quotation marks. Let's just kind of highlight so we know what we're talking about. Ending punctuation, punctuation would be, you know, a period, a question mark, or an exclamation point. Those are the only ways we can end a sentence. So ending punctuation and commas. So we use commas to separate what someone's saying from who said it in a sentence inside the quotation marks. And then here's an example. Where are you going? Mom asked. Wow, that's kind of confusing because there's no punctuation at all in that sentence, so I'm going to add it in now. And you might want to, when you write this, go ahead and add it in with a different colored pencil. So I'm starting my quotation marks here because that's the first word that they said, and I've started it with a capital. It's also the beginning of the sentence. Where are you going? And then Is this something she said out loud? Mom asked. No, that was telling me who said it. So here's the last thing she said, and I'm putting the quotation marks on the outside. Now the ending punctuation is inside the quotation mark. So that's what we were saying. Your punctuation that ends the thing they said goes inside the quotation marks. And now normally we would separate it with a comma. If this would just end with a period, like I like cats, Mom said, we would just put a comma there and then Mom asked. But since it's a different type of sentence, it's a question that she's asking, we're putting a question mark. And then, of course, we're going to put our punctuation for the actual sentence. So that's the tricky thing when you use quotation marks, is that this is a complete sentence. This is what she said. So we have our beginning and we have our punctuation. But the rest of the sentence is right here. So we've got to have our final punctuation, and we capitalize Mom because we're using it in place of her name right here. Okay, go ahead and pause the video so you can get this written down. You know, I'm even going to draw a little arrow here to highlight the idea that we have two different punctuation marks in this sentence because the quotation marks set this off separately. All right, go ahead and pause if you need to. And then here's another example. I am going outside to ride my bike, Mike replied. So that's what Mike said, but I'm kind of wondering, how do I separate what Mike said? Well, this is the first thing he said. I'm going to put the quotation marks there. What was the last word he said? Yeah, it was bike. Now I have to put the punctuation, the end punctuation, before the quotation marks. So what am I going to put here? I am going outside to ride my bike. Well, he's not asking a question. It's just a regular statement. And I'm not going to put a period since I'm about to tell you who said it. I'm going to put a comma. That's how I set it apart. So we've always got comma and quotation marks, and that's like the song that we learned, you know. You put the comma and then the quotation marks. But now I need punctuation for the end of this sentence. So I put my period here. So the comma goes inside the quotation marks, and then your period goes at the end of your sentence. All right, pause if you need to write this down. All right, the next one says use a comma before the first quotation mark if the sentence begins before the quotation mark. So up here, the quote or the dialogue was the first thing in the new sentence, and who said it was at the end. But if who said it is at the beginning of the sentence, we do it a little bit differently. So the comma goes before the first quotation mark. I think that's all we'll highlight. And then we'll read this example. Mom smiled and said, please make your bed before you go. So what was the first thing Mom said? Did she say the word said? No. She said please. And that's why we've capitalized please here, even though it's in the middle of the sentence, because that is the beginning of the sentence she said out loud. She said, please make your bed before you go. The last thing she said was go. Now, to separate the quotation or the dialogue from who said it, I put a comma to separate it. And then the ending punctuation of the sentence is the same as the ending punctuation of the quote. So we just put a period there. So I'm going to put a little arrow right there, and I'm going to put a little arrow here. So when you write sentences that have dialogue in them, you're always going to put more than one punctuation in there, okay? You're going to have your end punctuation for the sentence, and then you'll also have a comma, or occasionally you'll have like a question mark or an exclamation point at the end of the thing that the person said. But that's pretty much it. So go ahead and pause if you need to keep getting this stuff written down. I'll move it back real quick if you missed something at the top. You can pause right there and finish, and that is it for quotation marks in your notebook.